High above the bustling streets of New York City, in the gilded confines of Trump Tower, a storm was brewing that no one saw coming. Barron Trump, the youngest of the Trump lineage, stood alone in the sprawling penthouse living room, the faint hum of the city below muffled by walls dripping with opulence, gold-trimmed furniture, crystal chandeliers, and paintings that screamed wealth. He wasn't admiring the view or the luxury, though. His gaze was fixed on a crumpled letter clutched in his hand, its edges worn from hours of nervous handling. It was an acceptance letter from Evergreen State College, a radical liberal haven nestled in Washington state, a place where tree-hugging activists and outspoken professors preached ideals that clashed with everything his family stood for. He'd sent the application in secret, driven by a restless urge to break free, to carve out a space where he wasn't just the heir to a dynasty but a person with his own voice. Now, with the letter in hand, the reality of his choice hit him like a freight train, and the weight of what was about to unfold made his chest tighten. Footsteps echoed down the marble hallway, heavy, deliberate, unmistakable. His father was coming. "You've got some explaining to do, kid." Donald Trump's voice boomed as he stormed into the room, his face a mask of fury, ties slightly askew from a day of barking orders. He waved his phone in the air, the screen glowing with a news alert that had just broken. Barron Trump defects to liberal college, family in shock. Someone had leaked it, maybe an aide, maybe a hacked email, but the how didn't matter now. What the hell is this? Evergreen State? Are you trying to ruin me, ruin us? Barron straightened, his hands trembling but his voice steady as he met his father's glare. "It's not about you, Dad. It's about me. I need to do this, to figure out who I am outside of all this." He gestured vaguely at the room, the empire, the name that loomed over him like a shadow he couldn't escape. "Outside of this?" Donald's laugh was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. "This is your legacy, your birthright. And you're throwing it away for some granola-eating, protest-chanting lunatics who love nothing more than to see me fail? You think they'll accept you? They'll eat you alive, Barron." "I don't care what they think of me," Barron shot back, his voice rising with a defiance he didn't know he had. "I'm not going there to fit in. I'm going there to learn, to see the world through eyes that aren't yours. You've always told me to be strong, to stand up for what I believe in. Well, this is me doing that." Donald stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing as he studied his son, searching for a crack in his resolve. "You're making a mistake, and I'm not going to stand by and watch you tank your future. You're not going. End of story." "You can't stop me," Barron said, quieter now but no less firm. "I've already accepted. I leave in a week." The words hung between them, a gauntlet thrown down in a room that had never felt so small, so suffocating. For a moment, neither spoke, the only sound the distant wail of a siren far below, a city oblivious to the battle raging in its tallest tower. The air in the Trump Tower penthouse thickened with tension as Barron's words settled over the room, each syllable a jagged edge slicing through the fragile veneer of control Donald Trump clung to. He stood frozen for a heartbeat, his broad shoulders squared against the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the glittering Manhattan skyline, his face a storm of disbelief and rage. Barron remained where he was, rooted to the spot near the sleek leather sofa, the crumpled acceptance letter still gripped in his hand like a lifeline he couldn't let go of. Outside, the city churned on, taxis honked, lights flickered, people hustled. But up here, time seemed to stall, suspended in the clash of wills between a father who'd built an empire and a son who wanted to dismantle his place in it. The silence didn't last long. Donald turned sharply, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor as he closed the distance between them, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl that carried the weight of years spent commanding boardrooms and rallies. "You leave in a week? You think you can just drop that on me and walk away like it's nothing?" Donald's hands gestured wildly, cutting through the air as if he could physically reshape the situation. "I've given you everything, schools, opportunities, a name people respect, and you're tossing it in my face for some campus full of loudmouths who hate everything I've worked for. Explain it to me, Barron, because right now, it looks like you're either naive or you're trying to stick it to me." Barron's jaw tightened, his fingers curling tighter around the letter until the paper crinkled audibly, but he didn't flinch under his father's glare. "It's not about sticking it to you. It's about me needing something real, something that isn't handed to me because of who you are. I've spent my whole life in this bubble, private tutors, security details, people watching every move I make, and I'm suffocating. Evergreen isn't perfect, but it's raw, it's messy, it's a place where people argue and think and don't just nod along because of a last name." "Raw and messy?" Donald barked a laugh, sharp and humorless, as he paced toward the bar in the corner, snatching a glass and pouring himself a splash of amber liquid from a decanter. You want messy, you stay right here and deal with the press that's about to tear you apart. You think those kids at Evergreen are going to welcome you with open arms? They'll see you as a walking target, a chance to take a swing at me through you. And you're too green to see it. Maybe I am green? Barron countered, stepping forward, his voice rising with a heat he rarely let show. But I'd rather figure that out for myself than keep living like some extension of you. I'm not a prop, Dad. I'm not here to smile for cameras or sign deals I don't care about. I want to know what I believe, not just what you've told me to believe. Donald slammed the glass down on the counter, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the room, his face reddening as he spun back to face his son. You think you're some philosopher now? You're 18, Barron. You don't know what you believe because you haven't lived long enough to earn it. I've fought tooth and nail to build this life, to give you a head start most people would kill for, and you're acting like it's a curse. It's not a curse, it's a cage, Barron shot back, his hands balling into fists at his sides, the letter now a wrinkled mess. You've spent your life fighting, and I respect that. But I'm not you. I don't want to spend mine proving I'm tough enough to wear your shadow. I need to stand on my own, even if it means falling flat on my face. The room seemed to shrink around them, the weight of their words pressing against the walls, the chandeliers, the polished surfaces that reflected their distorted figures. Donald's eyes narrowed, his breathing heavy, and for a moment, it looked like he might shout again. But instead, he leaned forward, resting his hands on the back of a chair, his knuckles whitening as he gripped it. You're not just walking away from me, you're walking into a war zone. Those people out there, reporters, students, critics, they'll crucify you. And don't expect me to come running when it blows up in your face. I don't, Barron said, quieter now, but the resolve in his voice was unshaken. I'm not asking you to save me. I'm asking you to let me go. He turned then, moving toward the hallway that led to his room, but paused at the threshold, glancing back. I'm doing this whether you like it or not. The only question is whether you'll still talk to me after. Donald didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the spot where Barron had stood, the glass of untouched liquor trembling slightly in his hand as the boy disappeared from view. The city outside roared on, indifferent to the fracture widening in its tallest tower, but inside, the silence was louder than ever, a prelude to a reckoning neither father nor son could yet fully grasp. The penthouse felt like a pressure cooker the next morning, the air heavy with unspoken words and the faint scent of coffee drifting from the kitchen where staff moved silently, sensing the unrest that lingered from the night before. Barron had retreated to his room after the confrontation, the crumpled acceptance letter now smoothed out and tucked into a drawer, a quiet symbol of his resolve. He sat on the edge of his bed, scrolling through his phone, the screen lighting up with notifications, news headlines, text messages from friends, even a few cautious inquiries from his older siblings who'd caught wind of the storm. Downstairs, Donald Trump paced the living room, his phone pressed to his ear as he barked at advisors, his voice carrying up through the floorboards like a drumbeat of frustration. The contrast between them had never been starker, the father, a towering figure of power and unyielding certainty, and the son, young and untested, teetering on the edge of a choice that could redefine him. Barron's fingers hesitated over a text from his mother, Melania, are you sure about this? And he swallowed hard, the doubt creeping in, not about the decision itself, but about the cost it might exact. You think you can just ignore this? Donald's voice erupted as he stormed into Barron's room without knocking, his presence filling the space like a tidal wave, his suit jacket unbuttoned and his face flushed from a sleepless night. He held up his own phone, the screen displaying a live feed of protesters outside Trump Tower, placards waving, voices chanting, a chaotic swirl of anger sparked by the leaked news of Barron's college choice. Look at this mess. They're calling you a traitor, saying you're turning your back on the family, on me. You've given them ammunition, and they're loving every second of it. Barron set his phone down, standing to meet his father's gaze, his lanky frame tense but steady. I didn't leak it, Dad. I didn't want this circus. But I'm not surprised either. Everything we do gets twisted into someone's war. I'm still going, though. This doesn't change that. Doesn't change it? Donald's laugh was sharp, almost a snarl, as he tossed his phone onto the bed and jabbed a finger toward Barron. You're stirring up a hornet's nest and acting like it's a field trip. You've got no idea what's waiting for you out there. Those kids at Evergreen, they're not just gonna debate you, they'll shred you. And the press? They'll feast on this for months. You're not ready for that kind of heat. Maybe I'm not ready, Barron admitted, his voice low but firm, his hands shoving into his pockets as he squared his shoulders. But I'll never be if I stay here, locked up in this place where everyone's too afraid to tell me the truth. I've seen how you handle the heat, yelling, fighting, doubling down. That's not me. I want to listen, to understand, even if it means getting burned. Donald's expression shifted, a flicker of something surprise, maybe even unease, crossing his face before the mask of fury snapped back into place. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a hiss. Listen and understand? That's weakness talking. You think those people out there care about your soul-searching? They smell blood, Barron, and you're handing it to them on a platter. I raised you to be a winner, not a punching bag. I'm not trying to win anything, Barron shot back, his eyes narrowing as he held his ground. I'm trying to live. You've spent your whole life proving you're the toughest guy in the room. Maybe I don't want to spend mine doing the same. I'd rather figure out what's worth fighting for than just fight because I can. The room seemed to pulse with their words, the atmosphere shifting as staff paused in the hallway outside, their footsteps faltering before hurrying away. Donald's hands clenched at his sides, his breathing audible, and for a moment, it looked like he might grab Barron by the shoulders and shake him. Instead, he turned abruptly, striding to the window and staring down at the crowd below, their distant shouts filtering up through the glass. You're naive, he said finally, his tone quieter but laced with bitterness. You think you're noble, chasing some grand truth. But the world doesn't reward that, it chews it up and spits it out. Barron watched his father's back, the broad silhouette framed against the city he'd conquered, and felt a pang of something he couldn't name, regret, maybe, or pity. I'm not looking for the world to reward me, he said, his voice softening but unwavering. I just want to sleep at night knowing I didn't let fear pick my path. You taught me to stand up, Dad. This is me standing. Donald didn't turn around, his hands gripping the window frame, his knuckles widening as the chants from below grew louder, a chaotic chorus that seemed to mock the silence between them. Barron stayed where he was, his heart pounding, the weight of his words settling into the space like dust after a collapse. The gap between them wasn't just generational, it was a chasm of purpose, of vision, and neither knew yet if it could be bridged. The city outside watched, waiting, as the tension in the tower climbed higher, a prelude to a breaking point no one could predict. The penthouse had grown eerily quiet by late afternoon, the earlier shouts and pacing replaced by a stillness that felt more like a held breath than peace. Barron sat at the dining table, a half-eaten sandwich abandoned in front of him, his phone buzzing incessantly with messages he didn't have the energy to answer. The acceptance letter lay unfolded beside him, its creases a map of the fight that had consumed the last 24 hours. Downstairs, the protesters had thinned out, their voices hoarse from hours of chanting, but the news vans remained, cameras trained on Trump Tower like vultures circling a wounded animal. Donald had disappeared into his office after their last exchange, the doors slamming shut with a finality that echoed through the halls. Barron's mother, Melania, had texted again, "Come talk to me when you're ready," but he wasn't ready, not yet. He needed to think, to brace himself for what came next, when the sound of footsteps jolted him upright. It wasn't his father's heavy stride this time, it was slower, softer, and accompanied by the faint tap of a cane. "Barron," a voice rasped from the doorway, and he turned to see his grandfather, Fred Trump Jr.'s widow, his Aunt Maryanne, standing there, her silver hair pulled back tightly, her eyes sharp despite the lines etched into her face. She rarely visited, her relationship with the family strained by years of distance and unspoken grudges, but here she was, unannounced, leaning on her cane as she stepped into the room. "I heard what's happening. Thought I'd see it for myself before the papers turn it into a circus." Barron stood, surprised, his hands brushing crumbs from his jeans as he gestured to a chair. "Aunt Maryanne, I didn't know you were coming. It's kind of a mess right now." "I can see that," she said, easing herself into the seat with a grunt, her cane resting against the table. "Protesters outside, your father's temper rattling the walls, and you sitting here looking like you've just signed your own exile papers. Evergreen State, huh? Bold move, kid. Stupid, maybe, but bold." "It's not stupid," Barron replied, sitting back down, his voice steady but tinged with exhaustion. "It's what I need to do. Dad thinks it's a betrayal, but I'm not running away from him. I'm running towards something else." Maryanne studied him, her lips pressing into a thin line, her fingers tapping lightly on the table. "Your father's not wrong about the world out there. It's vicious, especially to anyone with our name. But I didn't come here to lecture you. I came because I've been where you are, caught between what this family expects and what I wanted for myself. I chose law, not real estate, and your grandfather never forgave me for it." Barron blinked, leaning forward, his curiosity piqued. "You fought with Grandpa over that?" He always made it sound like the family was unbreakable, like we all just fell in line. "Unbreakable." She let out a dry laugh, her hand brushing the cane as if grounding herself. "We bent plenty, just never where anyone could see. I went to law school because I wanted to argue for something bigger than buildings. Your dad saw it as a rejection, same way he's seeing this with you. But here's the thing, he's not the one who gets to decide what makes you whole." The words landed hard, and Barron's breath caught, his fingers tracing the edge of the letter as he processed what she'd said. Before he could respond, the office door down the hall swung open, and Donald strode out, his face darkening as he spotted Maryanne. "What are you doing here? Come to gloat over this disaster?" "I'm here to talk to my nephew," Maryanne shot back, her tone cool but unyielding as she turned to face him. "Someone's got to, since you're too busy yelling to listen. He's not defecting, Donald, he's growing up. You should try it sometime." Donald's hands clenched at his sides, his voice rising as he stepped closer. "Growing up? He's throwing away everything I've built for some fantasy about finding himself. You of all people should know how this family works. Loyalty matters." "Loyalty's a two-way street," Maryanne retorted, her eyes flashing as she pushed herself to her feet, leaning on her cane for support. "You want him to be your echo, not your son. I watched you do the same with Freddie, pushing until he broke. Barron's not breaking, he's choosing. Let him." The room froze, the mention of Freddie, Donald's late brother, a wound the family rarely touched, hanging heavy in the air. Donald's face paled, his mouth opening then closing as he stared at his sister, then at Barron, who sat wide-eyed, the pieces of a history he'd only glimpsed snapping into focus. Maryanne didn't back down, her gaze locked on her brother, and for the first time, Donald looked uncertain, his hands dropping to his sides. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said finally, but his voice lacked its usual fire. "I know enough," Maryanne replied, softer now, turning to Barron. "You go to that college. You make your mistakes. And you call me if it gets rough, not him. He'll come around when he's ready." She nodded once, then hobbled toward the door, leaving Barron and Donald staring at each other, the unexpected ally shifting the ground beneath them in ways neither had seen coming. The penthouse settled into an uneasy calm as Aunt Maryanne's footsteps faded down the hallway, her cane tapping a slow rhythm until the elevator doors swallowed the sound entirely. Barron remained at the dining table, his hands resting on the acceptance letter, the ink blurring slightly where his fingers had brushed it too many times. Donald stood rooted near the doorway, his broad frame blocking the light from the hall, his face a mix of frustration and something softer, something that might have been doubt, though he'd never admit it. The silence stretched between them, thick with the echoes of Maryanne's words, her invocation of Freddie lingering like a ghost neither had dared to summon before. Outside, the city hummed its relentless tune, car horns, distant voices, the faint buzz of helicopters circling for a better shot of the tower, but inside, the world felt smaller, reduced to the space between a father and son who'd just seen each other anew. Barron's phone buzzed again, a news alert flashing about his college choice, but he ignored it, his eyes fixed on his father, waiting for the next move. "You think she's right?" Donald finally said, his voice low, almost cautious, as he stepped into the room and sank into a chair across from Barron, his hands folding on the table. "You think I'm pushing you too hard, like I did with Freddie? That's what this is about." Barron hesitated, his fingers curling inward as he searched for the words, his throat tight with the weight of the moment. "I don't know what happened with Uncle Freddie, not really. You never talk about him, and Mom just says he was fragile. But I know I don't want to end up resenting you, or myself, because I didn't try to find my own way. This isn't about you failing me. It's about me needing to stand up, even if it's messy." Donald's jaw tightened, his gaze dropping to the table, his fingers tapping an uneven rhythm against the wood. "Freddie couldn't handle the pressure. Wanted to fly planes instead of build towers, and I thought he was throwing his life away. Pushed him until he stopped pushing back. I don't want that for you. Not the breaking part. But this college thing, Barron, it's like you're asking for a fight you don't need." "I'm not asking for a fight," Barron replied, leaning forward, his voice steady despite the tremble in his hands. "I'm asking for a chance. You've always said you made your own rules, built your own world. Why can't I do that too? Evergreen isn't the enemy, it's just a place. What matters is what I do there, not what you think it means about you." Donald looked up then, his eyes meeting Barron's, and for a moment, the room held its breath, the clash of their wills softening into something rawer, more human. "You're stubborn as hell," he said, a faint quirk tugging at his lips, not quite a smile but close. "Guess you got that from me. I don't like this, not one bit. But I'm not gonna lock you in here. You go, you deal with whatever comes. Just don't expect me to cheer you on while you're at it." "I don't need cheers," Barron said, his shoulders relaxing slightly, a flicker of relief breaking through the tension. I just need you to not hate me for it. I'm leaving in a few days. I'd rather we didn't spend them yelling. Donald exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair, the gesture uncharacteristically weary. Hate you? You're my kid. I don't hate you. I'm pissed. Yeah, and I think you're nuts, but that's not the same thing. Go pack your bags, figure out your life. Just don't call me when those professors start preaching nonsense. Barron nodded, a small gesture, but it carried the weight of a truce, not a victory, but an understanding. He stood, gathering the letter and his phone, and headed toward his room, pausing at the doorway to glance back. Thanks, Dad. For letting me go, I mean. Don't thank me yet, Donald grunted, waving a hand dismissively as he leaned back in the chair, his eyes drifting to the window. We'll see how this plays out. The next morning, as Barron hauled his suitcase to the elevator, the doorman tipped his hat, his voice low. Heard about your college, kid. Takes guts. People downstairs are still buzzing about it. Outside, a small crowd lingered, reporters, onlookers, a few stragglers with signs murmuring among themselves as Barron stepped into the waiting car. He's really doing it, one said, a woman with a notepad, her tone a mix of skepticism and awe. Thought the old man would chain him to the building first, another replied, snapping a photo. Barron didn't look back as the car pulled away, the tower shrinking in the rear view, his father's silhouette a faint outline against the glass. He'd chosen his path, not an easy one, not a safe one, but his own, and that was enough to carry him forward, wherever it led.